Hi, I'm Minda Tracy, and I'll be taking you through how to use Excel's Power Query and Power Pivot tools to build this interactive Excel dashboard you see behind me. I am super excited to show you these tools, and I'm ready with my I Simply Excel t-shirt on. A little background for those who don't know me. I started working with Excel about 23 years ago when I worked as an accountant in investment banks in London. Now I live in Australia with my husband Phil and our two boys Connor and Finn. I gave up accounting around 9 years ago to pursue my passion for Excel and desire to help people get more out of it, which I do through our website and blog at myonlinetraininghub.com. I run online Excel dashboard courses and have trained thousands of people from all over the world and from a vast array of industries. And for the last 4 years, I received the Microsoft Excel Most Valuable Professional Award for my contribution to the Excel community. Now, I just want to set some expectations for the webinar. It is going to be at a fast pace. You won't have time to follow along step by step. Now, I'll be using Excel 2016 Office 365. Power Query and Power Pivot are available in Excel 2010 onward, but not in all versions of Excel. So I've included links in the Excel file for this webinar on which versions of Excel support these tools. Now, the map charts I'm going to use are only available in Office 365, but don't worry if you don't have the map charts because they're not mandatory. I just wanted to include them to show you this new feature. Now, we've got a lot to cover, so I won't be going into a huge amount of detail. For example, I can't teach you pivot tables or everything there is to know about Power Query and Power Pivot, but you will see all the steps required to create the interactive Excel dashboard, and I'll be sharing the Excel file and data so you can have a go yourself afterwards. Now, some of the steps are fairly advanced, but don't be intimidated by what I'm about to show you because you can still benefit from Power Query and Power Pivot without ever touching the advanced features. All right, let's get started. Get yourself comfy while I move to my desk. Okay, this is the workbook that I'm going to build the dashboard in. This sheet 1 is where I'm going to build the actual dashboard, and it is just a regular sheet. I've put some headings here just to save me some time, but I want to make it clear that it's nothing special, it's not an add-in or anything like that. It's just a regular sheet, and I'll call it dashboard now that I've convinced you that there's nothing special about this sheet. The next thing I need to do is go and get my data that I want to work with, and that's in a folder. I've got 3 CSV files here, and I've got one extra one for later on. I want to show you how I can update this dashboard once it's built. So we're going to start with these 3 CSV files, and I'm going to use Power Query to grab them from this folder. So I'm just going to copy the path to save me some time, and then in Excel on the Data tab I'm going to get data from file from folder. Now, if you're using Excel 2010 or 2013, you'll have your own Power Query tab in the ribbon, and you'll go from file, from folder. So it's slightly different in Excel 2016. We've got Power Query in this Get and Transform data group. There's no Power Query tab, but they are one and the same thing. So from file, from folder, and I'm just going to paste the file path into the dialog box rather than having to browse to it. Now it wants the folder path, so I'll delete the file name off the end and get rid of that double quote at the beginning, and we'll click OK. So Power Query is going away to look at that folder, and it's going to bring me back a list of all the files, and that's what I see here. Now I have some options to combine, load or clean data. I want to combine them and edit before I load it anywhere, so I'm going to go Combine and Edit. Power Query is looking at the data in the first file, and it brings me back a preview. It's detected the origin, the delimiter, and it's used the first 200 rows to do that. It all looks good in the preview here, so I'm going to just click OK. And Power Query will open the Power Query editor window, and this is a separate window in Excel. You can see there it's independent of Excel, so I'll just double click to maximize it. We've got a familiar ribbon interface and tabs just like we do in most Office products. And on the left here we have all of the queries and functions that Power Query has automatically generated in order to go and grab those files from the folder. I don't need to worry about them much for now, what I want to do is work with the data that it's brought in and make some changes before I load it into PowerPivot. So it's pulled in the file name. I don't actually need that column, so I'm going to press delete and get rid of it. And then if we look at the data, I've got here order quantity, unit sale price and discount, and then shipping amount, but I haven't got the actual sale amount. So I need to calculate that. And I can just select the columns that I need. So I want to multiply the order quantity by the sale price and then take the discount off. I'm going to add a column, and in the calculation I just want to choose multiply. And you'll see it's added a new column here called multiplication. Now I need to just modify the formula a little bit. It's taking the order quantity times the unit sale price times the discount, but I actually need 1 minus the discount. So I'm just going to modify the formula, and now I get the correct result. But we need to give it a proper name. So double click and we'll call it sale amount. And I don't want it all these decimal places, so I want to round that column. So just go to transform and then rounding, and I'll just go round to 2 decimal places. Notice in the applied steps pane, we've got all these steps that have been recorded for us, much like a macro recorder would record VBA. In Power Query, it's recording all those steps, so that when I add that new file to my folder, it's going to apply all these steps to that new file, and I won't have to repeat any of this over again. So it's even better than VBA and macros because there's no complicated code. So now I have my sale amount. Let's just move it in line with the other value columns. Now the next thing I want to do is I've got an order date here and I've got a ship date here, and I want to calculate how long it takes to ship the products. So let me just drag it down so that it's beside the order date column. So we've got order date and ship date. I want to subtract the order date from the ship date and add a new column. So I'm just going to go add column, date, subtract days. And now I have the days to ship. Let's give that a name, days to ship. And we've got the steps recorded. So I'm pretty happy with my data now. I think I'm ready to load it into PowerPivot. I just want to check the data type. So it's detected this is a whole number, that's the icon there, but I could click on it and change the data type if I needed to. But I just want to have a quick look at them all and make sure that they all look appropriate. This one here actually is a percentage, so let's change that. It doesn't affect any of the calculations, it's just a data type. And PowerPivot actually needs these data types set correctly for it to work with the data. So I'm pretty happy with that. Let's give it a name. This is my sales data. So if you're familiar with databases, then this is my facts, my fact table. It contains loads of transactions which I want to summarize in my report. So I'm happy with that now, and all I need to do is go to the Home tab and close and load to. And at this point I can choose to load it into the Excel workbook in a sheet, or I could create a pivot table with it, or I could create a pivot chart. There's lots of options, but what I want to do is just create a connection. I don't need my data in the worksheet, I just want to add it to the data model, which is PowerPivot. So that's all I want to do. If I add it to a worksheet, then I'm doubling up the data in my file, and that's just going to make it bigger than I need. So I'm going to click OK. Power Query is grabbing the data and it's loading it. You can see here in the queries pane, it's loading it into PowerPivot. And it says it's loaded, so let's go and click on Manage Data Model. That's also available on the PowerPivot tab. So I can click it there as well, and this will open the PowerPivot window. And we can take a look at the data, and you can see it's loaded 6,299 rows, and our data's all in order. So it's ready to work with, but I haven't really got a complete picture of everything I want to summarize the data by. For example, I've got customer ID, but I don't have any more information about that customer, and I want to plot my data in a map. I want to be able to see where those customers are and how my sales are spread out across a map. So I need to bring in some information about the customers. I've also got the SKU, or the product code, and I don't have any more information really about that product. I'd really like to aggregate the sales by product category, so I need to bring that information in as well. Now, if you were working with regular pivot tables, then you might do a VLOOKUP to another table that could find the SKU and bring in the category information, and likewise for the customer, and you create one big flat table for your pivot table. But with Power Pivot, we don't need to do that. So let me just pop back to Excel, because on this sheet here I have dimension tables. So we've got my SKU and there's the category, and I've got my customer ID and information about where that customer is located. So I can bring these two tables into Power Pivot, and rather than creating lookups to make one big flat table, I can just use these fields in my pivot table. So let me show you. On the Power Pivot tab, with a cell selected in my table, I'm just going to go Add to Data Model. And you can see now I've got another table in here. It's brought in the category information. Let's go back and do the same for the customer. We'll Add to Data Model. Now we've got our customer information. So now all I need to do is create relationships between those tables. So this is my fact table. And again, if you're familiar with databases, then the category dim is the dimension table for the categories, and the customers table is the dimension for the customers. So now I just find a field in the fact table, the sales data, that's present in my category table. So that would be the SKU. And I left click and drag, and Power Pivot will create a relationship between those two tables. Now I'm just going to select the SKU in this table and right click and hide from Client Tools. What that will do is it will just hide that field when I'm building pivot tables, so I won't accidentally select the wrong one, because I want to be working with this table rather than the SKU in this table, because this one has my category information. And for customers, well, I need to create a relationship between the customer ID and the customer column, because in my customers table, if we go and have a look at it, this is the customer ID that's present in my sales data table. This is the customer ID here. So I need to create relationships between fields that are present in both. And the dimension tables should have a single or a unique value for every customer, just one ID for every customer. And that's why I have a 1 on this side, because this is the one relationship, and the asterisk is the many side. There's many customer IDs that are the same in this sales data table, whereas there's only one for each customer ID in the customers table. So we've got our relationships for these tables, but there's something else I want to do. And if we go back to Excel, I've got two more tables here. I've got data in my fact table for the shipping mode, and when I use that field in my pivot table, it will automatically sort them in alphabetical order as they are here. But really I want them sorted in a different order. I want delivery truck first, then regular air, and then express air. So I've got a field here for sort order. And I can use that field to force the pivot table to sort these in this order. And I can do the same for the order priority. I've got the order priority and then the sort order. All I need to do is add them to Power Pivot and create a relationship between this table's shipping mode and this one. And then let's go back and grab this one, add to data model. And I'll create a relationship for the order priority here and order priority there. Now let's just hide these from Client Tools, and the same for ship mode. So I'm nearly done with those, but I need to tell Power Pivot to actually use these sort orders. So I'm just going to go to the table, and I'm going to select this column and say sort column by the sort order. So it's going to sort the ship mode column by the sort order. And I need to do the same for this one. Sort by column, sort by the sort order. So now when I use those fields in my pivot table, they'll be sorted in numerical order as opposed to alphabetical. Okay, let's go back to Excel. One thing I want to mention is in Excel 2013 and 2010, this add to data model is slightly different, the icon. I think it says linked table or add linked table. It's got a link symbol, but it's essentially the same thing. Alright, well, I've got my data all in Power Pivot. It's all ready to go. And the one thing I want to do before we start building pivot tables is just apply some formatting so that when I use these fields in my pivot table, the formatting will carry through and I won't have to reformat any of the charts or pivot tables. So for the unit sell price, it's a currency. For the discount, it's going to be a percentage format. Now notice it didn't bring through the format from Power Query. What I was doing in Power Query was setting the data type as opposed to the formatting, and they're quite different, but I cover them in more detail in my courses. And then for the sale amount, this is also a currency. Now I also want to hide the decimals because when it aggregates the data, I don't want any decimals. They're going to be pretty big numbers and I don't need any decimals as well. For the shipping amount, let's make that currency as well, and we'll hide the decimals. I'm ready to build my first pivot table. Now, if you have Excel 2010, you need to build your Power Pivot pivot tables from the Power Pivot window, because that way you're going to be using the data model. But I can close this because in Excel 2013 and 2016, which I'm using, I can insert a pivot table, and I can say use this workbook's data model, which is Power Pivot, and I'll pop it on a new worksheet. So before we get started, what I want to do is, let's just dock that. I want to have a look at the dashboard. So this is just a screenshot of the dashboard I'm building now. Let's just familiarize ourselves with the pivot tables that we need in the pivot charts. So the first one I need to build is sales by category. We've got the salesperson, the category, and then the sales amounts. So let's start building that. We need the sale amount, and I'll just drag it into place. I need the category, and notice here in my field list, I'll drag it out and make it a bit bigger. I have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tables that I can work with when I'm building pivot tables. So I need the category field from the category table. I've got the sale amount from the sales data, the fact table, and I want to know the salesperson as well. And notice that my formatting has carried through. I haven't had to set the value field settings there for the formatting. But what I do want to set is the sort order. So I'm just going to right click and go into more sort options. Here I want to sort it in ascending order by the sum of sale amounts. I want the salesperson who've sold the most overall at the bottom, and that will actually appear at the top of the chart, and I'll show you why in a moment. And then within the salesperson, let's sort them from smallest to largest. Let's pop in a pivot chart. Now I'm going to choose a bar chart because the labels here are quite long and the bar chart suits those long labels. So there's my bar chart. And notice that Bob is at the top of the pivot table but at the bottom of the bar chart. And that's kind of a unique thing with bar charts because they're essentially a column chart on their side and then the axes get all messed up and what have you. So you can either change the sort order by setting the axis field sort order, or you can do it in the pivot table. I just find it quicker and easier to set the pivot table, and that will feed through to my chart. Now I'm not going to do any formatting here. I'm going to do that last when we move everything to the dashboard sheet. But I need my next chart, and that will be for the sales up here, this line chart by salesperson and quarter. So let's insert another chart, another pivot table I should say, and it's detected that I'm going to put it on the existing worksheet and use the data model. So we're happy about that. So let's put the sale amount in and the salesperson, and I want the order date. Now when I drag this in, notice what happens. Excel will detect that it's a date field and it automatically groups them into months, quarters and years. And notice it's added new fields to my field list. I haven't had to right click and group the dates as you normally would in regular pivot tables. And this is actually just unique to Excel 2016 onward, this automatic grouping. Normally you would have to right click and group, Or in Power Pivot, you could also have a date table that has those groupings. And that's another topic for my course, but I don't have time to cover it now. Now I've just realized that my salesperson is in the wrong orientation. So let me just insert the pivot chart and you'll see what I mean. I'm going to pop that in there. And what I actually want are the quarters along the horizontal axis. So let's just go in and we'll switch the rows and columns. There we go. Now I don't want the dates, the days, so I'm just going to grab them and take them out. All right, that's better. So we've got our pivot chart for our sales over time. And again, I'm going to tidy that later. Now, one thing I need to do, and I haven't yet, is to give these charts or these pivot tables names so that when I'm looking for them later to connect the slices, I'm going to know which one is which. If they just have their default name like pivot table 1, pivot table 2, I'm not going to have a clue what they are. So we'll call this sales pivot, and this will be the salesperson pivot, we'll call it. And I'll name the sheet. Now normally I wouldn't put more than one pivot table on a sheet because pivot tables are designed to grow as your data gets updated, and they will get bigger, and this one could overlap the one beside or vice versa. Just depends on the orientation of them and how they're laid out and that type of thing. But you just don't want to take that risk and have one pivot table be able to accidentally overwrite another one, because it's just going to make a mess of your report. And you know what? Sheets are really cheap. Just add another sheet. It doesn't cost anything. So ignore the fact that I'm putting multiple pivot tables on the one sheet. I'm just trying to cut some corners to get this done in the hour that I have. Okay, let's just take a quick look at the example. So I've got these two. Let's do the shipping ones next. So we'll insert a pivot table, and I want these ones will put on their own sheet. So these will be the ship pivots, and the first one is the ship mode, and from the sales table we want to know the type of container it's being shipped in, and then I want to know the average shipping price per item. So really what I need to do is count the number of items ordered, sum them up, and divide the shipping amount by the sum of the order quantity. So the sum of the shipping by the sum of the order quantity. Now I can write a Power Pivot measure that will calculate that for me. So on the Power Pivot tab we have measures, and I can create a new measure. So we'll call this average shipping price per item. And we have a formula bar just like Excel, and in fact we have functions very similar to Excel, and actually there are some functions that are the same in Excel. For example, sum is in Excel and it works in the same way. I want to sum the shipping amount, and I'll close the sum. Now divide just allows me to handle div errors. So in Excel, if we divided by 0, we get a div error. In Power Pivot, we can use divide to give us an alternate result if we end up with a div error. It's a bit like if error, but it's a special one just for divide. So then the next one is sum the order quantity. So this one's on the sales data sheet, and it's order quantity. So we'll close the parentheses on sum, and we'll close it on divide. Actually, before I do that, let me just, if it results in an error, we just want it to return a blank. And this one, we want a currency, and we'll leave it at 2 decimal places because they're going to be quite small amounts. So I'll click OK. This is going to add a new field to my field list. You can see it there, and it's automatically populated it in the pivot table for me. And you can notice it's got a unique icon before it, the FX, to tell me that this is a custom formula, it's a measure. Now I want them sorted in the order I set in Power Pivot. So instead of alphabetically, they're sorted using the numbers, so delivery truck, regular air, and express air. But then within those, I'm going to sort them from smallest to largest. Okay, and let's add a pivot chart. And again, because this has long column labels, we'll use a bar chart. It's going to be the most suitable. And I'll just move it over there. Don't worry, I know it's really ugly right now, but we're going to make it beautiful. I'm just going to copy this pivot table and we'll modify it for the next chart. So instead of product container, I want to know the order priority. And I don't want the average shipping amount here. I want to know the average days to ship. So let's bring that in. And instead of summing it, which is the default, I'm just going to right click and say average. Now let's just set the number format for the value field there, and we'll change it to 2 decimal places. Okay, that's better. Let's add a chart for this one. Again, the bar chart is going to be best because there's long labels, and I'll leave it there. Now I haven't named these, so let's go and do that before we move on. So this is going to be average ship price, and this one's going to be average days to ship. Okay, so let's see how we're going. We've done these ones, the pivot tables and pivot charts over here. Let's do the map charts. Now, the map charts do not have a pivot table or a pivot chart equivalent. They're a new chart type and they only work with regular data, not pivot tables. So we have to trick it into using the pivot table. I'll insert some new ones. We're going to put these on a new worksheet for the maps. Call it map pivots, and let's get started. So for this, I want to know the state, and then I want the sales amounts for the customers in those states. And at the end of the pivot table, we've got a grand total, so I'm just going to right click and remove that because I don't want to plot that in my chart. So in order to trick the map chart into using this pivot table, I'm just copying and pasting the data as values, and I'm going to insert the map chart. Now these are only available in Excel 2016 for Office 365 users, but don't worry if you don't have them. They're not essential for all dashboards, but because my data has information about location, I thought it would be nice to plot it in a map, and that gives me an opportunity to show you this new chart type. So there's my map chart. At the moment it's picking up this data that's been pasted as values, but I want it to refer to the pivot table because then I can connect a slicer to this pivot table, which will allow the user to filter the pivot table, and that will update the chart. So I'm going to right click and select data, and in here we're just going to edit the cells that it's referring to. So instead of column E, I want column B, and instead of this one down here is also B, and then let's edit this one. Instead of D, we want A. Okay, so now the map chart is pointing to the pivot table. I can get rid of that data and we'll move the map over. So that's my first map chart. Let's just copy this pivot table and we'll modify it for the next one. So instead of sales, we want average days to ship. So let's bring that in, and we'll right click and summarize by average, and we'll change the value field settings. Actually, it doesn't even matter, but it will affect the legend, so let's change that. And again, I'll copy this and paste it as values. We'll insert the map chart, and then we'll modify it so that it points to the pivot table. So instead of column M, we want J and J and J, and here we want I and I. Okay, let's get rid of that data there, and we'll just modify this. What I'm doing here is I'm popping the legend at the top, and that means I don't really need a chart title because it kind of says it all. So I'm saving some space in using the legend as my title. Alright, so we've got our two map charts. Let's name the pivot tables before I forget. Map customers, and this one is map shipping. Okay, so let's just take a look at the dashboard that we're building. We've built all the charts and tables for these visuals that we have here. I need to build pivot tables that are going to feed these Sparklines. So I need my data over time by category, and I just want the top 4 customers. So let's insert a pivot table on a new worksheet. We'll do the categories first. So I want the category field from that table, and I want the sales amounts by category, and I want the time. So let's pop that in there. Now I want to expand this out to the quarters, and that's what I want to plot. So let me get rid of the grand total there and that one, because what I actually just need are these values. That's what's populating my Sparklines. And let's give this one a name. We'll call this Spark category, and we'll just copy this one and paste it below. Remember, don't do this at home or in the real world. Don't put your pivot tables underneath one another. And this one is my customers. So from my customer table, I'm going to grab the customer field. And what I actually want to do is sort these in a descending order by the sum of the sale amount. So it'll sum all the sales for each customer and sort them. And now I just want to filter them because I only want the top 4. So I'm going to go top 4 items by sum of sale amount. So these are my top 4 customers that are going to feed my Sparklines. So now we've got everything in place, we're ready to build the dashboard. And all we need to do is go and grab the charts, Control A to select them all, Control X to cut them out, and paste them in. It's pretty simple. Once they're all built, we just move them around a little bit. Now I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time formatting, but we'll do a little bit, and then at the end I'll make them look much nicer. So let's just Control X and Control V. Now these ones are a bit big. Okay, let's get rid of that. Actually, this can go a lot wider. Alright, and what's missing? The maps. Let's grab them. Control A, Control X. Go to the dashboard sheet, paste them in. Now this one needs to move down here, and we'll just resize them a little bit. Okay, so what's missing? We're missing the Sparklines. So all I need to do is actually just reference the pivot table. So on the Spark, oh, I didn't name that sheet, look. Let's name that Spark Pivots. And I'm going to bring that to the front, just it's quicker for me to reference it if it's right beside. So equals that field. And that's just going to make sure that I'm always picking up the field in the right order from the pivot table. Just in case this order gets altered, I'm just referencing it, so it will always be correct. And then I can copy it down. Now, what I want to do is insert some Sparklines. And a Sparkline wants a range. And ideally, I want the range that it's going to reference to grow, because as I add new data, I don't want to have to go and edit that range and have to do a load of work to maintain this dashboard. So what I want is a dynamic named range. And I don't want to create one for each Sparkline. That's 4 there and then another 4 there. I'm too busy for that. So I'm going to create what is called a relative dynamic named range. It's relative in that I'm going to write it once, and then depending on the row that I want to pick up, it will alter. And I have to thank Christopher Mangles for this idea because he shared it with me. So let's write the formula for the dynamic name range. I'm going to use the offset function. Now if you don't follow this, don't worry too much because I've got tutorials on offset that will step you through it. I like to write my formulas in a cell, but I'm actually going to create a name with them. So for now I'm just going to select the cell that I'm going to insert the Sparkline in first. So where am I offsetting? Well, it wants to know the reference. Well, we'll just make this the reference. It's just my anchor point. I'm going to F4 to absolute that cell. The next argument is how many rows from that cell do you want to move down? Well, I don't know. That depends which category I'm looking up. So I can use match to return the row number. So I want to match this, and here is where I'm going to just absolute the column and not the row. And that way, as I copy the formula down, it's going to dynamically update. Which lookup array? Well, it's in this range here, absolute. And then I want to match it, the type, match it exactly, so I'm using 0. So that's my how many rows from this anchor point am I moving down? Well, it depends what the match is. How many columns from this point am I moving across? Well, none, because I want to start always in this column. So I'm just going to add another comma to ignore that column argument. Now it's saying how high do you want the range? Well, it's just one row high for each category. And then how wide? Well, this is where I want to allow for growth. So I'm just going to do count R, and I'm going to count the quarters here, and I'm going to extend out past the pivot table range to allow for growth. And then I'm going to close the parentheses and count R, and then close it on offset and press enter. It returns a value. It's actually just returning the first value because it can't return all of them in the range. But I don't want it to return the value. I just put it in there so I could copy it and then define my named range. We'll call this DNR Spark category. And in here, I'm going to paste in, Control V to paste in my formula. I'll click OK. I don't need it in there anymore. Now I can insert my Sparkline. What range? Well, I can't remember exactly what I called it, so I'm going to press F3, brings up the list of names, just double click, that's my range, click OK. Now let's just highlight the high point and we'll tone the color down a little bit. So now I've done one, I'm going to copy and paste one at a time, and notice that it's returning different results. I've used the same dynamic name range, but because it's being used on a different row, it's relative and it's evaluating and picking up bikes for this row, clothing and components. And I can actually prove that by going into the formula name manager. Here's my range name. I can click in refers to, and it puts the marching ants around the field that it's evaluating to. So I know it's returning the correct data. Now let's rinse and repeat for the customer. I'll just select that cell there, I'll copy it down, we'll write the offset, which cell is my reference point, this one here will do. How many rows? Well, I don't know, we'll use match to find this value in this range when you want to match it exactly. How many columns do we want to move across? None, so skip that argument. What's the height? Just one row. And what's the width? Don't know. Let's count the quarters and allow for growth. Close the parentheses, and then I just copy that formula and define a new name. We'll call this DNR, Dynamic Name Range, Spark Customers. And then we'll paste it in here and click OK. We'll get rid of that value there. Insert the Sparkline, F3 to bring up the list, double click customers, lovely, we'll highlight the high, we'll just make it consistent. Copy, paste, and we're done. So our dashboard is coming along. Let's make the charts a little bit more attractive, shall we? So let's just grab these ones. These ones could be a bit moved up a bit. And okay, so the first thing I do with these pivot charts is get rid of these field buttons. So I'm going to right click, hide that one, hide the value field. I don't need the legend because I only have one series, it's self-explanatory. I'm going to remove the grid lines and the axis there because I want to add data labels. And let's just Control 1 to set the gap width to 50%. That will just make the bars a bit more substantial. We'll give this a title, call it Sales by Category. And I'm happy with that now. I've left these expand and contract collapse buttons on the pivot chart. These are new in Excel 2016 and they allow me to contract the data and expand on the face of the chart. So I actually like them. I'm going to keep those ones. Now I've formatted this bar chart, I'm just going to copy it with the outside selected. Select the outside of this one and Control V to paste. And now all my formatting has been applied to this chart. I haven't had to reformat it. So copy and paste. And because they're bar charts, I can just copy the formatting like that. I don't have to do a lot of work. So that's a nice shortcut. You just have to put up with them being ugly for a while. So let's give these names. Average shipping price per item, and this one is average days to ship. Okay, now you notice that there's a dark border around these two charts. That is actually a byproduct of when you copy and paste formats. So let's just quickly fix that. Unfortunately, we can't grab them both and apply it at the same time, but I've formatted this one. Now I'm just going to press F4 and format that one. So that's a bit of a shortcut. F4 will repeat formatting. So let's do the same with this. We'll hide the fill buttons. Now I can't copy the bar chart formatting to this because it would turn this into a line, this line chart into a bar chart, and that would be pointless. And let's move the legend to the top. That's where I prefer it. Now this right click has stopped working. There's a bit of a bug, so I'm just going to go in here and turn the fill button off for the legend in there. I'll move this over and we'll give this chart a name as well. Call this sales. Now let's just give this a bit more space. Okay. One thing that's going to make my dashboard look a lot more like a dashboard is to turn off the grid lines. So let's get rid of those. And I'll just give my header row a border. We'll make it blue in keeping with my color scheme, and I just want it there. Okay, so we've got a bit of a header area. Let's give it a name, sales and shipping dashboard, and let's format that. We'll give it that dark blue color as well, and that'll do for now. Okay, so everything's coming together nicely. What I don't have so far, and if we look at the example, are the slicers that allow me to filter all of the charts and tables. So let's insert the slicers. Now all I need to do is select one of the pivot charts. I can't select the maps because they're not pivot charts, they're regular charts. And then insert and slicer. Here I can insert slicers for any fields in any of the tables. So I need the category slicer. I want the order year and the product container and the shipping mode. Oh, and the salesperson. So we're going to insert all those slices in one go. Now let me just move them. We'll get rid of that for a minute. I'll just move them over here so we can manage them a bit better. So now I just need to make them smaller so they fit into the space that I have available. So shipping mode's going to go up here, and let me give it 3 columns. Now let's just make it a bit bigger to fill the space. Okay, we can make it a bit wider. Alright, and the next one is going to go up here. It's the product container. Now there's 7 of them, so let's give them space, and I'll just left click and drag. You can copy the sizing, so this one's 1.72 high. Let's make this one consistent, 1.72, and then we can align them to the top and use the arrow keys to reposition. Alright, so they're ready. Let's bring the order date over here. Now this one, we'll make it 2.8 high, and I'm going to right click and change the slicer settings to turn off the header. That'll just give me a bit more space, and we'll make the button smaller. Alright, let's squish that up. That doesn't need much room. So the next one, we'll pop the salesperson in over here, and let's make the button smaller. And it doesn't need to be so wide. Whoops. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time making them all fit because I'm conscious that we haven't got a lot of time left. Okay, this one I need to get rid of the header as well. Really because I haven't got a lot of space, but also it's kind of self-explanatory what those fields are doing. Let's make that smaller. All right, so we've got our slicers installed, but when I click on them, they're only going to update this chart. And that's because they're only connected to this chart. So what I need to do is right click on it and go into the report connections. And in here I can tell it which pivot charts and pivot tables I want this slicer to work with. And this is where naming them becomes really important. And notice this one down here, I obviously didn't name that because it's still called Pivot Table 8. It's on the Spark Pivot sheet. So let's go and sort that out. That'll be this one here, I'd say. Yes, it is. So this is Spark Customers. Okay, I could have sworn I named that, but obviously not, or something went wrong. So now we've got the report, or the pivot table named. I can go in and check the boxes that I want. And for this I want them all except for the Sparklines. And that's because the Sparklines are showing me data over time. I don't want to filter the dates. I want it to always show me all of them. So I'll click OK. Now let's just rinse and repeat for the other slices, and they're all slightly different. So with the salesperson one, I don't want to filter any of the sales pivots because they already have the salesperson information. Oops, that one and that one. They already have it in there, so I don't want to filter it. You might want to in yours. It's just my preference for this particular dashboard. So with the categories, this one I don't want to filter any of the pivot tables that have category information already in it. So we want the maps, want the salesperson, average days to ship, average ship price. I don't want the Spark category, but I do want the Spark customer. Oh, actually, I don't want this sales by category. This one, sales pivot. That one there has categories, so I'll exclude that one. All right, ship mode. Let's do this one. I wish this dialog box would stay bigger. So customers and shipping, salesperson, days to ship, and shipping price. I don't want to include those because they already have the ship mode in them. All right, and last one. Resize this window. So maps, and the only one I don't want to do is the average shipping price because it's already got, where is it here? It's already got the container in there. Okay. So everything's connected now. When I click on some items in a slicer, you can see everything responds. And the maps and what have you. The next thing I need to do is use my color choices to create relationships in the data. So everything's looking quite subtle, but what I want to do is differentiate. I've got sales information in here and then days to ship. And then more sales information, more sales, and then price per item, and then average days to ship. So this is sort of shipping information, this one, and this one, and the rest are all sales information. So let's differentiate them with color. So let's change the color of this one. We'll use a green color scale for the shipping. So this, let's go ahead and, oops, on the Format tab, we'll change the shape fill to this green color, and I'll just select that and press F4 to repeat. This one is sales, so let's go and we'll change the color scheme for this, and we'll just make it shades of blue. So everything is coming together really nicely. I'm pleased with my dashboard. It's responding to the slicers, and I think it's pretty much done. The next thing is, well, what happens next month when you need to update the data? Or in my case, I've got data for the next year. So let me just show you the files. Here are the 3 files I'm working with. That's what's present in my dashboard here. And I've got another file here. So let's just imagine you've got this update. All I need to do is move this to my data folder that Power Query is referencing. So now I have 4 files in there. In order to get that data into my dashboard, all I have to do is go up to the Data tab and click Refresh All. Now watch this chart here because it's got the years across here. I refresh all. Power Query is going to that folder, it's looking at all the files, it's grabbing the new one, it's adding the calculations that I added for the sale amount and the days to ship. It's loading the data into Power Pivot and it's updating my dashboard. And literally, it's done. Now we have 2017 in here. I obviously need to make my slicer a bit smaller because I can't see all of the fields or all of the buttons. So let's just select that and we'll go up here and make it a bit smaller. There we go. So now my slicer has 2017 in it. I can filter everything just for that data. And my work is done. I mean, I could go and grab a cup of tea or coffee. I could go home early. I could work on something more fun. I could learn some new things in Excel, Power Query and Power Pivot. I've just got loads of time back. So I hope you're wowed by the power, excuse the pun, but the power that we have now with tools like Power Query and Power Pivot, the ability to analyze data from multiple tables in one dashboard, in one pivot table and pivot chart. I've got this drill down functionality. I can expand into my data. I can filter. I can even share this dashboard in a web page. I can embed it in a web page and the slices will work. You could view it on an iPad or a tablet and use the slices to filter without really having to even experience Excel. Well, I hope you enjoyed this webinar and are excited by what can be achieved in Excel when you use Power Query and Power Pivot together. I ran through this quite quickly because I wanted to show you as much as I could so you could get a feel for Power Query, Power Pivot and building dashboards in Excel using these tools. You're going to get an email in the coming hour with the replay and the files that you can download. And this is just the beginning. So keep in mind that Power Query and Power Pivot can connect to a huge range of different data sources. So if your data is in an external system or database, or even multiple systems, then you can easily get it and clean it with Power Query, mash it up and analyze it in Power Pivot, and then report on it in your Excel dashboards. And the best part is, next month you just click the refresh button and your work is done. And the added benefit of learning Power Query and Power Pivot is these skills are transferable to Power BI because the same tools are integrated into Power BI Desktop, so you get double your bang for your buck. Now if you'd like to get up to speed with Power Query and Power Pivot fast, please consider getting these courses in one of the bundle deals that I offer with my dashboard course, so you can start impressing your boss and colleagues with dashboards that leverage these amazing tools. Now if you have any questions, email me at website@myonlinetraininghub.com and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks for your time today and happy dashboarding.